Hi everyone, and welcome to another part of Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. The customary quote: happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light. From Albus Dumbledore. A brief review of the last part, where we finished Chapter 2 after continuing our discussion on Queen against Rook. We also completed Chapter 3 after discussing the topics attacking without the aid of knights, attacking with knights as a prominent force, and winning by indirect attack. In Chapter 4, we discussed the topics the initiative and direct attacks en masse. So now, moving further into the book, Capablanca continues the discussion on the topic direct attacks en masse. He writes, Example 51. Another example of this kind. In the position on board, the simple move, knight takes e5 would win. But white looks for complications and their beauties. Such a course is highly risky until a wide experience of actual master play has developed sufficient insight into all the possibilities of a position. This game, which won the Brilliancy Prize at St. Petersburg in 1914, continued as follows. Bishop h4, Queen d7, Knight takes c8, Queen takes c6, Queen d8 check, and Queen e8. If instead King f7, Knight d6 check, King moves, mate next move. So Queen e8, Bishop e7 check, King f7, Knight d6 check, King g6, Knight h4 check, and King h5. If King h6, Knight f5 check, King h5, Knight takes g7 check, King h6, Knight f5 check, King g6, Queen d6 check, and mate next move. So King h5, Knight takes e8, Rook takes e8, Knight takes g7 check, King h6, Knight f5 check, King h5, and h3. The climax of the combination started with Bishop h4. White is still threatening mate, and the best way to avoid it is for black to give back all the material they have gained and to remain 3 pawns behind. The student should note that in the examples given, the attack is carried out with every available piece, and that often, as in some of the variations pointed out, it is the coming into action of the last available piece that finally overthrows the enemy. It demonstrates the principle already stated. Direct and violent attacks against the king must be carried en masse or all together with full force to ensure their success. The opposition must be overcome at all cost. The attack cannot be broken off, since in all such cases that means defeat. Moving further, Capablanca starts the next topic under the heading number 22, the force of the threatened attack. He writes, failing an opportunity in the second case for direct attack, one must attempt to increase whatever weakness there may be in the opponent's position. Or, if there is none, one or more must be created. It is always an advantage to threaten something, but such threats must be carried out into effect only if something is to be gained immediately. For holding the threat in hand forces the opponent to provide against its execution and to keep material in readiness to meet it. Thus, they may more easily overlook or be unable to parry a thrust at another point. But once the threat is carried into effect, it exists no longer, and your opponent can devote their attention to their own schemes. One of the best and most successful maneuvers in this type of game is to make a demonstration on one side, then through the greater mobility of your pieces, to shift your forces quickly to the other side and break through, before your opponent has had the time to bring over the necessary forces for their defense. A good example of position play is shown in the following game. Example 52, played at the Havana International Masters Tournament 1913. French defense: white, Jose Raul Capablanca; black, Rafael Blanco. Capablanca's opponent here is Rafael Blanco Estera, a Cuban painter and chess player who played in the first half of the 20th century. He was also 3 times Cuban chess champion. Capablanca continues. E4, E6, D4, D5, knight C3, D takes E4, knight takes E4, knight D7, knight F3, knight F6, knight takes F6, knight takes F6, and knight E5. This move was first shown to me by the talented Venezuelan amateur M. Ayala. The object is to prevent the development of black's queen bishop via b7 after b6, which is black's usual development in this variation. Generally, it is bad to move the same piece twice in an opening before the other pieces are out, and the violation of that principle is the only objection that can be made to this move, which otherwise has everything to recommend it. Bishop d6 and queen f3. Bishop g5 might be better. The text move queen f3 gives black an opportunity of which he does not avail himself. c6. c5 was the right move. It would have led to complications in which black might have held his own. At least white's play would be very difficult. The text move c6 accomplished nothing and puts black in an altogether difficult position. The veiled threat, bishop takes e5 followed by queen a5 check, is easily met. c3, castles, bishop g5, and bishop e7. The fact that black has now to move his bishop back clearly demonstrates that black's plan of development is faulty. He has lost too much time, and white brings his pieces into their most attacking position without hindrance of any sort. Bishop d3 and knight e8. The alternate was knight d5. Otherwise, white would play queen h3 and black would be forced to play g6, seriously weakening his king side. Not h6 because of the sacrifice bishop takes h6. So knight e8 queen h3 and f5. White has no longer an attack, but he has compelled black to create a marked weakness. Now white's whole plan will be to exploit this weakness, the weak e-pawn, and the student can see how the principles expounded previously are applied in this game. Every move is directed to make the weak e-pawn untenable, or to profit by the inactivity of the black pieces defending the pawn in order to improve the position of white at other points. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, castles, rook f6, rook e1, knight d6, rook e2, and bishop d7. At last, the bishop comes out, not as an active attacking piece, but merely to make way for the rook. Rook e1, rook e8, c4, and knight f7. A very clever move, tending to prevent c5 and tempting white to play knight takes d7, followed by bishop takes f5, which would be bad as the following variation shows: knight takes d7, queen takes d7, bishop takes f5, knight g5, queen g4, rook takes f5, h4, h5, queen takes f5, e takes f5, rook takes e8 check, king h7, h takes g5, and queen takes d4. But it always happens in such cases that if one line of attack is anticipated, there is another, and there is no exception to the rule, as will be seen. So, knight f7, d5, and knight takes e5. Apparently, the best way to meet the manifold threats of white. C takes d5 would make matters worse, as the white bishop would finally bear on the weak e-pawn via c4. So knight takes e7, rook takes, knight takes e5, rook takes e5, g6, queen h4, king g7, queen d4, and c5. Forced, as white threatened d takes e6 and also queen takes a7. So c5, queen c3, and b6. Queen d6 was better, but black wants to tempt white to play d takes e6, thinking that he will soon after regain his pawn with a safe position. Such, however, is not the case, as white quickly demonstrates. I must add that in any case, black's position is, in my opinion, untenable or indefensible, since all his pieces are tied up for the defense of a pawn, while white's pieces are free to act. D takes e6, bishop c8, and bishop e2, the deciding and timely maneuver. All the black pieces are useless after this bishop reaches d5. Bishop takes e6, bishop f3, king f7, bishop d5, and queen d6. Now it is evident that all the black pieces are tied up, and it only remains for white to find the quickest way to force the issue. White will now try to place his queen at h6 and then advance the h-pawn to h5 in order to break up the black pawns defending the king. Queen e3 and rook e7. If f4, queen h3, h5, queen h4, rook e7, queen g5, king g7, h4, queen d7, g3, f takes g3, f4, and black will soon be helpless as he has to mark time with his pieces while white prepares to advance a5 and finally at the proper time to play rook takes e6, winning. So rook e7, queen h6, king g8, h4, a6, h5, f4, h takes g6, h takes g6, and rook takes e6, where black resigned the game. Commentating on white's play in this game, Dr. Emanuel Lasker said at the time that if white's play were properly analyzed, it might be found that there was no way to improve upon it. These apparently simple games are often of the most difficult nature. Perfection in such cases is much more difficult to obtain than in those positions calling for a brilliant direct attack against the king, involving sacrifices of pieces. Moving further, Capablanca starts the next topic under the heading number 23, Relinquishing the Initiative. He writes, in the third case, there is nothing to do once the material advantage is obtained, but to submit to the opponent's attack for a while, and once it has been repulsed, to act quickly with all your forces and win on material. A good example of this type of game is given below. Example 53 from the Havana International Masters Tournament 1913. Re Lopez. White, Jose Raul Capablanca. Black, David Janoski. Capablanca's opponent here is David Janoski, a Polish-French chess player who played around the turn of the 20th century. Several opening variations carry Janoski's name. Capablanca continues. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, castles, b6, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, d4, bishop e7, and knight c3. D takes e5 might be better, but at the time I was not familiar with that variation, and therefore I played what I knew to be good. So knight c3, knight d7, d takes c5, d takes e5, queen e2, castles, rook d1, bishop d6, bishop g5, queen e8, knight h4, and g6. Black offers the exchange in order to gain time and to obtain an attack, without considering at all whether or not such a course was justified on the part of black. it is evident that as far as white is concerned, there is only one thing to do, namely to win the exchange and then prepare to weather the storm. Then, once it is past, to act quickly with all forces to derive the benefit of numerical superiority. Bishop h6, knight c5, rook d2, rook b8, knight d1 and rook b4 to force white to play c4 and thus create a hole at d4 for his knight. Capablanca gives a footnote here elaborating, "A hole in chess parlance has come to mean a defect in pawn formation, which allows the opponent to establish their forces in wedge formation, or otherwise without the possibility of dislodging them by pawn moves. Thus, in the position on board, black has two holes at f6 and h6, where white forces, for example a knight or bishop, could establish themselves, supported by pieces or pawns." Returning back to the illustration, Capablanca continues, "Such grand tactics show the hands of a master. c4, knight e6, bishop takes f8, queen takes f8, and knight e3. Knight f3 was better, so knight e3, knight d4, queen d1 and c5 in order to prevent rook takes d4, giving back the exchange but winning a pawn and relieving the position. b3 and rook b8 in order to play bishop b7 without blocking his rook. Black's maneuvering for positional advantage is admirable throughout this game, and if he loses, it is due entirely to the fact that the sacrifice of the exchange, without even a pawn for it, could not succeed against sound defensive play. Knight f3, f5, e takes f5 and g takes f5. The position begins to look really dangerous for white. In reality, black's attack is reaching its maximum force. Very soon it will reach the apex, and then white, who is well prepared, will begin his counteraction, and through his superiority in material obtain an undoubted advantage. Knight f1, f4, knight takes d4, c takes d4, queen h5, bishop e7, rook e1 and c5. He could not play rook e8 because of rook takes d4. Besides, he wants to be ready to play e4. At present, white cannot with safety play rook takes e5, but he will soon prepare the way for it. Then, by giving up a rook for a bishop and a pawn, he will completely upset black's attack and come out a pawn ahead. It is on this basis that white's whole defensive maneuver is founded. f3, rook e8, rook e2 and rook e6. Now the black rook enters into the game, but white is prepared. It is now time to give back the exchange. Rook takes e5, bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, rook h6, queen e8, Queen takes e8, rook takes e8, check, king f7, rook e5, rook c6, and knight d2. Rook f5 check might have been better. The text move, knight d2, did not prove as strong as anticipated. King f6, rook d5, rook e6, knight e4 check, and king e7. Rook takes e4 would lose immediately. So king e7, rook takes c5, and d3. Very fine. White cannot play rook c7 check because of king d8. Rook takes b7 and rook takes e4, winning for black. So, d3, king f2, bishop takes e4, f takes e4, rook takes e4, rook d5, and rook e3. The ending is very difficult to win. At this point, white had to make the last move before the game was adjourned. b4, rook e4, rook takes d3, rook takes c4, rook h3, rook takes b4, rook takes h7 check, king f7, rook takes a7, king f5, king f3, rook b2, rook a5 check, king f6, rook a4, king g5, rook takes f4, rook takes a2, h4 check, king h5, rook f5 check, king h6, and g4, where black resigned the game. I have passed over the game lightly because of its difficult nature and because we are at present concerned more with the opening and the middle game than we are with the endings, which will be treated separately. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. 2 new supporters, 64 Hobbiton and khamisiyah. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Till next time, take care.